Chapter 1 of Legacy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Peak. Legacy by James Schmitz. Chapter 1. This book is dedicated affectionately to my father. It was the time of sunrise in Sais, the White City, placidly beautiful capital of Macedon, the university world of the hub. In the Colonial School's sprawling 5-mile complex of buildings and tropical parks, the second student shift was headed for breakfast, while a larger part of the fourth shift moved at a more leisurely rate toward their bunks. The school's organized activities were not much affected by the hour, but the big exercise quadrangle was almost deserted for once. Behind the railing of the firing range, a young woman stood by herself, gun in hand, waiting for the automatic range monitor to select a new string of targets for release. She was around 24, slim and trim in the school's comfortable hiking outfit. Tan shirt and knee-length shorts, knee stockings, soft-soled shoes. Her sun hat hung on the railing, and the dawn wind whipped strands of shoulder-length, modishly white-silver hair along her cheeks. She held a small, beautifully worked handgun loosely beside her. The twin-barreled sporting Denton, which gun-wise citizens of the hub rated as a weapon for the precisionist and expert only. In institutions like the Colonial School, it wasn't often seen. At the exact instant the monitor released its new flight of targets, she became aware of the aircar gliding down toward her from the administration buildings to the right. Startled, she glanced sideways long enough to identify the car's two occupants, shifted her attention back to the cluster of targets speeding toward her, studied the flight pattern for another unhurried half-second, finally raised the Denton. The little gun spat its noiseless, invisible needle of destruction 8 times. 6 small puffs of crimson smoke hung in the air. The 2 remaining targets swerved up in a mocking curve and shot back to their discharge huts. The girl bit her lip in moderate annoyance, safetied and holstered the gun, and waved her hand left-right at the range attendant to indicate she was finished. Then she turned to face the aircar as it settled slowly to the ground 20 feet away. Her gray eyes studied its occupants critically. "Fine example you set for the students," she remarked, "flying right into a hot gun range." Dr. Plemponi, principal of the Colonial School, smiled soothingly. 8 years ago your father bawled me out for the very same thing, Trigger. Much more abusively, I must say. You know, that was my first meeting with old Runser Argee, and I... Plemp!" Mihul, chief of physical conditioning, women's division, cautioned sharply from the seat behind him. "Watch what you're doing, you ass!" Confused, Dr. Plemponi turned to look at her. The aircar dropped the last 4 feet to a jolting landing. Mihul groaned. Plemponi apologized. Trigger walked over to them. "Does he do that often?" she asked interestedly. "Every other time," Mihul asserted. She was a tall, lean, muscular slab of a woman, around 40. She gave Trigger a wink behind Plemponi's back. "We keep the chiropractors on standby duty when we go riding with Plemp." Now then, Dr. Plemponi said. "You distracted my attention for a moment, that's all. Now, Trigger, the reason we're here is that Mihul told me at our pre-breakfast conference that you weren't entirely happy at good old Colonial School. So climb in if you don't have much else to do, and we'll run up to the office and discuss it." He opened the door for her. "Much else to do?" Trigger gave him a look. "All right, Doctor, we'll run up and discuss it." She went back for her sun hat, climbed in, closed the door and sat down beside him, shoving the holstered Denton forward on her thigh. Plemponi eyed the gun dubiously. "Brushing up in case there's another grabber raid?" he inquired. He reached out for the guide stick. Trigger shook her head. "Just working off hostility, I guess." She waited till he had lifted the car off the ground in a reckless swoop. "That business yesterday, it really was a grabber raid?" "We're almost sure it was," Mihul said behind her. "Though I did hear some talk they might have been after those 2 top secret plasmoids in your project." "That's not very likely," Trigger remarked. "The raiders were half a mile away from where they should have come down if the plasmoids were what they wanted. And from what I saw of them, they weren't nearly a big enough gang for a job of that kind." "I thought so too," Mihul said. "They were top flight professionals in any case. I got a glimpse of some of their equipment. Knockout guns, foggers, and that was a fast car." "Very fast car," Trigger agreed. "It's what made me suspicious when I first saw them come in." "They also," said Mihul, "had a high-speed interplanetary hopper waiting for them in the hills. 2 more men in it. The cops caught them too," she added. "They were grabbers, all right." "Anything to indicate whom they were after?" Trigger asked. "No," Mihul said. Too many possibilities. 20 or more of the students in that area at the time had important enough connections to class as grabber bait. The cops won't talk, except to admit they were tipped off about the raid. Which was obvious. The way they popped out of nowhere and closed in on those boys was a beautiful sight to see. I, Trigger admitted, didn't see it. When that car homed in, I yelled a warning to the nearest bunch of students and dropped flat behind a rock. By the time I risked a look, the cops had them. You showed very good sense, Plemponi told her earnestly. I hope they burn those thugs. Grabbing's a filthy business. That large object coming straight at you, Mihul observed calmly, is another air car. In this lane, it has the right-of-way. You do not have the right-of-way. Got all that, Plemp? Are you sure? Dr. Plemponi asked her bewilderedly. Confound it! I shall blow my siren. He did. Trigger winced. There, Plemponi said triumphantly as the other driver veered off in fright. Trigger told herself to relax. Aircars were so nearly accident-proof that even Plemponi couldn't do more than snarl up traffic in one. Have there been other raids in the school area since I left? She asked, as he shot up out of the quadrangle and turned toward the balcony of his office. That was just under 4 years ago, wasn't it? Said Mihul. No, you were still with us when we had the last one. 6 years back, remember? Trigger did. 2 students had been picked up on that occasion, sons of some Federation official. The grabbers had made a clean getaway, and it had been several months later before she heard the boys had been redeemed safely. Plemponi descended to a teetery but gentle landing on the office balcony. He gave Trigger a self-satisfied look. See, he said tersely. Let's go in, ladies. Had breakfast yet, Trigger? Trigger had finished breakfast a half hour earlier, but she accepted a cup of coffee. Mihul, all athlete, declined. She went over to Plemponi's desk and stood leaning against it, arms folded across her chest, calm blue eyes fixed thoughtfully on Trigger. With her lithe length of body, Mihul sometimes reminded Trigger of a ferret, but the tanned face was a pleasant one, and there was humor around the mouth. Even in Trigger's pre-graduate days, she and Mihul had been good friends. Dr. Plemponi removed a crammed breakfast tray from a wall chef, took a chair across from Trigger, sat down with the tray on his knees, excused himself, and began to eat and talk simultaneously. Before we go into that very reasonable complaint you made to Mihul yesterday, he said, I wish you'd let me point out a few things. Trigger nodded. Please do. You, Trigger, Plemponi told her, are an honored guest here at the Colonial School. You're the daughter of our late friend and colleague Runser Argee. You were one of our star pupils, not just as a small arms medalist either. And now you're the secretary and assistant of the famous pre-colonial commissioner Holati Tate, which makes you almost a participant in what may well turn out to be the greatest scientific event of the century. I'm referring, of course, Plemponi added, to Tate's discovery of the old galactic plasmoids. Of course, agreed Trigger. And what is all this leading up to, Plemp? He waved a piece of toast at her. No, don't interrupt. I still have to point out that because of the exceptional managerial abilities you revealed under Tate, you've been sent here on detached duty for the Pre-Colonial Department to aid the Commissioner and Professor Mantelish in the University League's Plasmoid project. That means you're a pretty important person, Trigger. Mantelish, for all his idiosyncrasies, is undoubtedly the greatest living biologist in the League. And the Plasmoid project here at the school is without question the League's most important current undertaking. So I've been told, said Trigger. That's why I want to find out what's gone haywire with it. In a moment, Plemponi said. In a moment. He located his napkin, wiped his lips carefully. Now, I've mentioned all this simply to make it very, very clear that we'll do anything we can to keep you satisfied. We're delighted to have you with us. We're honored. He beamed at her. Right? Trigger smiled. If you say so, and thanks very much for all the lovely compliments, Doctor. But now let's get down to business. Plemponi glanced over at Mihul and looked evasive. That being? He asked. You know, Trigger said, but I'll put it into specific questions if you like. Where's Commissioner Tate? I don't know. Where is Mantelish? He shook his head. I don't know that either. He began to look unhappy. Oh, said Trigger. Who does know then? I'm not allowed to tell you, Dr. Plemponi said firmly. Trigger raised an eyebrow. Why not? Federation security, Plemponi said, frowning. He added, I wasn't supposed to tell you that either, but what could I do? Federation security? Because of the plasmoids? Yes.